Katie Martinez stepped off the transport ship and onto the gleaming deck of Kepler Prime Station. The metal beneath her boots hummed with alien technology she barely understood. Around her, beings from across the galaxy moved with purpose and grace that made her feel clumsy and out of place. The Galactic Naval Academy rose before her like a crystal mountain. Its towers twisted toward the artificial sky in patterns that hurt her human eyes to follow. Everything here was perfect, clean, and utterly foreign. "So this is the Deathworlder," a voice said behind her in perfect standard. Katie turned to see a tall figure made of what looked like living crystal. His body caught the light and threw it back in rainbow patterns. This had to be a Zephyrian. "I am Prince Zarthek," the crystal being said. His voice sounded like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. "I have heard much about your kind. Primitives from a world that tries to kill everything on it." Katie kept her face blank. She had trained for this moment for years. Lieutenant Commander Katie Martinez reporting for Academy training. Zarthek laughed, a sound like breaking bells. "Commander? How amusing that your people give such ranks to children. Tell me, Deathworlder, can you even read our tactical displays? Without your crude translation devices?" Before Katie could answer, another voice cut through the air. This one was pure energy, speaking directly into her mind rather than her ears. "Leave the primitive be, Zarthek. We have more important matters than entertaining pets." The speaker was Velnara, daughter of a luminal admiral. She appeared as a shifting pattern of light and color, beautiful and terrible at the same time. Her thoughts pressed against Katie's mind like cold fingers. "At least she knows her place," Velnara continued. "Look how she stands there, trying so hard not to show her fear. How quaint." Katie picked up her gear bag and walked past both of them toward the academy entrance. She had expected this. The briefing files had warned her that most alien species saw humans as barely civilized savages. Earth was a dangerous world by galactic standards, and that made its people seem dangerous too. The academy halls were filled with beings Katie had only seen in videos before. Tall, graceful thalassans moved through pools of water that somehow stayed contained without walls. Small, quick meridians zipped between the larger species on wings of pure thought. Energy beings pulsed and shifted as they communicated in ways beyond human understanding. Katie found her assigned quarters and dropped her bag on the simple human-style bed they had provided. The room was clean and functional, but it felt like a cage compared to the flowing organic spaces the other species preferred. Her first class was Basic Galactic Strategy, taught by Commander Hickstal, a Zephyrian with military decorations covering his crystal chest. He spoke in the flowing musical language of his people before switching to standard for Katie's benefit. "We will begin with the fundamental principles of civilized warfare," Hickstal announced. "Order, precision, and honor are the foundations upon which all proper military doctrine is built." Katie raised her hand. "What about adaptability?" The room fell silent. Several alien faces turned toward her with expressions she couldn't read. "Adaptability?" Hickstal's voice carried surprise and something that might have been distaste. "War is not chaos, Lieutenant Commander. It is art. It follows patterns that have been perfected over thousands of years." "But what if the enemy doesn't follow those patterns?" Katie asked. Zarthek's laughter filled the room again. "Spoken like a true savage, you think war is about wild swinging and random violence, don't you?" Katie felt her face grow hot, but she kept her voice level. "I think war is about winning." "How crude," Velnara's mental voice whispered to everyone in the room. "She reduces the noble art of military science to simple survival instinct." Professor Quindar, a elderly thalassan floating in his water sphere, spoke for the first time. Perhaps the human would benefit from observing proper tactical simulations before offering her insights. The next few hours were torture. Katie watched as her classmates ran through battle scenarios using formations and strategies that looked beautiful, but seemed wasteful to her eyes. Ships moved in perfect geometric patterns, firing in coordinated volleys that prioritized style over effectiveness. When her turn came, Katie approached the problem differently. Instead of forming neat battle lines, she scattered her ships. Instead of meeting the enemy head-on, She used asteroids and debris as cover. Her simulated fleet moved like a pack of wolves, striking and fading, never where the enemy expected. Her victory was total and swift. The silence that followed was deafening. "Chaos," Commander Hickstall said finally. "Pure, undisciplined chaos." "But it worked," Katie pointed out. "A lucky accident," Zarthek snapped. "Any competent commander would have countered such crude tactics easily." "Then why didn't the simulation?" "More." Silence. Katie learned quickly that asking such questions only made things worse. Her instructors began giving her extra assignments and impossible deadlines. Her classmates treated her like a disease they might catch. Even the few who seemed friendly kept their distance when others were watching. Only one being seemed genuinely interested in her ideas. Ben Walker was a Meridian Coalition student, small and quiet, with large eyes that missed nothing. His people were pacifists by nature, and he struggled with the military aspects of their training. "Your battle simulation was fascinating," he said one day in the library, speaking quietly to avoid drawing attention. "You used the environment as a weapon. My people have theories about such integrated tactical thinking, but we've never seen it applied so effectively." Katie looked up from her study terminal. "Your people?" "We believe that true intelligence comes from working with natural systems rather than imposing artificial order on them," Ben explained. "But we've never been able to make it work in military applications. Too much violence required." "Violence isn't the point," Katie said. "Survival is." Ben tilted his head, considering this. "Perhaps that's what we've been missing. We think of war as something separate from life, but for your people it's just another form of survival challenge." Katie nodded. "On Earth, everything was constantly trying to kill you. Weather, animals, plants, even the ground itself could be deadly. Humans had learned to be flexible, to use whatever was available, to never stop moving or thinking or adapting. Here at the Academy, war was treated like a formal dance with rules and proper steps. To Katie, that seemed like a good way to die. Her grades remained high despite the hostility. She couldn't help but learn, and her human brain absorbed information in ways that impressed even her critics. But her methods and suggestions were consistently rejected, and her reputation as a troublemaker grew. The final insult came at graduation assignments. Katie watched as her classmates received postings to prestigious core fleet vessels and important command positions. Prince Zarthek was assigned to the flagship of the First Fleet. Velnara received a position on the Luminal Collective's most advanced warship. Katie's assignment was read last. "Lieutenant Commander Martinez," Commander Hickstall announced with barely concealed satisfaction. "You are assigned to border patrol duty aboard the UGS Horizon. Congratulations." The room erupted in whispers and barely suppressed laughter. Border patrol was where the Academy's failures went to disappear. It was exile disguised as duty. Katie stood and saluted properly. "Thank you, sir." As she walked out of the Academy for the last time, she heard Zarthek's voice behind her. "Give my regards to the Void, Deathworlder." Katie didn't look back. She had learned something important during her time here. The galaxy's greatest military minds were all thinking the same way, following the same rules, making the same assumptions. That might be a problem someday. She just didn't know how soon that day would come. The UGS Horizon was nothing like the sleek Academy training ships. Her hull showed decades of repairs and modifications. Paint peeled from her sides, and her engines made sounds that worried even the experienced crew. Katie stood in the docking bay, watching her new home with mixed feelings. Captain Torval emerged from the ship's entrance, his massive thalassine form moving slowly in his mobile water suit. His gills fluttered with what Katie had learned was the equivalent of a sigh. "So, you're the Deathworlder they stuck me with," he said, in heavily accented standard. "I heard about you at the Academy, the troublemaker who thinks she knows better than her instructors." Katie saluted crisply. "Reporting for duty, sir." Torval looked her up and down. "This is Border Patrol, Lieutenant Commander." We watch empty space and file reports that no one reads. We're as far from real military action as you can get without leaving the service entirely. Try not to cause problems. The crew of the Horizon was small and tired. Most were aliens from minor species that rarely advanced in the Galactic Navy. They treated Katie with polite disinterest, just another officer passing through on her way to nowhere. Her quarters were barely large enough for a bunk and a small desk. Katie unpacked her few belongings and tried to make the tiny space feel like home. Through her single porthole, she could see the edge of known space stretching into darkness. The daily routine was mind-numbing. The Horizon followed the same patrol routes week after week, scanning for smugglers and pirates that rarely appeared. Most of the crew spent their off-duty time in alcohol-induced stupors or lost in virtual entertainment programs. Katie found herself with too much time to think. She wondered what her academy classmates were doing now, probably attending important briefings on beautiful core worlds, planning strategies that would shape the galaxy's future. Meanwhile, she was stuck counting cargo containers and writing reports about stellar phenomena. But the phenomena were interesting. Katie began spending her free time analyzing the sensor data from their patrols. The official reports called them random energy fluctuations, background radiation from distant stars. Katie saw patterns that troubled her. The energy signatures appeared in clusters. They moved in ways that suggested intelligence behind them. Most importantly, they were getting stronger and more frequent. Katie brought her concerns to Lieutenant Kextar, the ship's science officer. The four-armed Nexarian looked at her data with professional interest. "These readings are within normal parameters," he said. "We see similar patterns throughout this sector." "But look at the timing," Katie insisted. "They're coordinated. These aren't natural phenomena." Kextar's four eyes blinked in sequence. "What are you suggesting?" "I think someone is watching us." Running reconnaissance missions, the science officer's laugh was a chittering sound. "Who would want to spy on this sector? There's nothing here worth stealing or conquering." Katie couldn't argue with that logic, but her instincts told her something was wrong. On Earth, prey animals that ignored warning signs usually ended up dead. Months passed. Katie's former classmates graduated and received their first real assignments. She saw their names in the official dispatches, promotions, commendations, assignments to increasingly important positions. Prince Zarthek was already commanding his own squadron. Velnara had been selected for advanced tactical training. Katie wrote reports that disappeared into bureaucratic databases. Her requests for investigation of the energy signatures were denied or ignored. Captain Torvel made it clear that he wanted quiet, routine patrols, not wild theories from a disgraced academy graduate. "You're seeing threats where none exist," he told her after her third formal report. "It's a common problem with your species. All that evolution on a dangerous world has made you paranoid." Katie stopped filing official reports, but she didn't stop watching. The patterns were becoming clearer. Whatever was out there was getting bolder, coming closer to the shipping lanes. Several cargo vessels had reported equipment failures in areas where Katie's sensors had detected the strange energy readings. The breakthrough came during what should have been a routine rescue mission. A civilian transport called the Lucky Strike had sent out a distress signal near the Vega asteroid field. "Engine failure," they said. "Standard breakdown requiring standard assistance." Captain Torvel approached the situation with typical boredom. "Another merchant who skipped maintenance to save money," he grumbled. "We'll tow them to the nearest station and file the paperwork." As the Horizon approached the transport, Katie monitored the sensor displays from her position at the tactical station. The readings were all wrong. The transport's energy signature was too clean, too perfect. No ship with engine failure should look like that on sensors. "Captain," she said, "I'm detecting anomalous readings from the transport." "Define anomalous," Torval replied without looking up from his command console. "The energy patterns don't match the reported malfunction, and I'm picking up traces of those unknown signatures we've been cataloging." "Lieutenant Commander Martinez," the captain's voice carried warning, "we've discussed your tendency to see patterns that aren't there." Katie watched the tactical display as they drew closer to the transport. Every instinct she possessed screamed danger. The energy readings were wrong. The transport's position was wrong. Even the distress signal had subtle irregularities that suggested it wasn't genuine. "Captain, I strongly recommend we maintain distance and conduct a full sensor sweep before proceeding." "Noted and ignored," Torvel said. "Helm, bring us alongside the transport. Prepare boarding procedures." Katie's hands moved over her console, running every scan she could think of. The transport looked normal to standard sensors, but the deep-range arrays were picking up something else entirely. Shadows that moved wrong. Energy patterns that bent space in impossible ways. "Captain, please," Katie said urgently. "Something is very wrong here." Torval turned his massive head toward her, his gills fluttering with irritation. "Lieutenant Commander, you will control yourself, or you will be confined to quarters. We are conducting a standard rescue operation." The transport was only a few 100 meters away now. Katie could see it clearly on the visual display, a standard civilian vessel showing all the right identification codes and distress signals. But her sensors told a different story. "All stop," she called out suddenly. "What?" Torvel began. But Katie had already activated the ship's emergency maneuvering thrusters. The horizon lurched sideways just as space around the transport erupted in black fire. Ships that seemed to absorb light itself materialized from nowhere. Weapons already charging. The transport vanished, revealed as some kind of holographic lure. "All hands, battle stations," Torvel shouted, finally understanding the danger. The unknown vessels moved like nothing Katie had ever seen. They phased in and out of normal space, appearing and disappearing faster than the horizon's weapons could track. Their weapons drained energy from the ship's shields, leaving them vulnerable to conventional attacks. "Return fire," Torvel ordered, but the horizon's aging weapons couldn't lock onto targets that existed in multiple dimensions at once. Katie's fingers flew over the tactical controls. She abandoned standard targeting protocols and began firing into empty space, predicting where the enemy ships would materialize based on their attack patterns. It was pure instinct, the kind of adaptive thinking the Academy had tried to train out of her. One of her shots connected. A black ship flickered into visibility, its hull cracked and leaking some kind of dark energy. The other vessels immediately withdrew, vanishing into hyperspace before the horizon could press its advantage. The bridge was silent except for the sound of damaged systems trying to repair themselves. Captain Torvel stared at the tactical display, his face pale with shock. "What were those things?" he asked quietly. Katie was already running analysis on the sensor data. Unknown technology. They use some kind of phase-shifting drive that lets them exist partially outside normal space. Their weapons appear to drain energy rather than deliver it directly. "How did you know to fire where you did?" Katie looked at the captain. "I watched their patterns. They weren't random. There was intelligence behind their movements, but it was alien intelligence. They don't think like us." Torvel was quiet for a long moment. "Prepare a full report. Priority transmission to Sector Command." "Sir, with respect, we've been filing reports about unusual energy signatures for months. They've been classified and buried." The captain's gills fluttered slowly. "This time will be different. We have wreckage, sensor data, and witness testimony. They'll have to listen." Katie wasn't so sure. In her experience, people preferred comfortable lies to uncomfortable truths. But she prepared the report anyway, documenting everything they had discovered about the unknown vessels and their capabilities. The response from Sector Command came 3 days later. The incident was classified at the highest levels. The crew of the Horizon was ordered to maintain complete silence about what they had encountered. Katie's detailed analysis was filed away in databases that required security clearances she would never possess. But she had copies of everything, and she had learned something important about their enemy. They were intelligent, advanced, and they had been watching the galaxy for much longer than anyone suspected. Most importantly, they could be beaten. It would require new tactics, new thinking. 2 years had passed since the incident at the Vega asteroid field. Katie had been moved from ship to ship, assignment to assignment, as her superiors tried to find somewhere to put the troublesome human officer. Her warnings about the unknown vessels had been buried so deep that most people forgot they ever existed. Now she served aboard the UGS Defiant, an aging cruiser that had seen better decades. The ship's captain was Lisa Hayes, a practical woman who had worked her way up through the ranks without political connections or family influence. She was one of the few officers who actually listened when Katie spoke. "Your service record makes interesting reading," Captain Hayes had said during their first meeting. "Brilliant tactical scores, but your commanders seem to think you're dangerous." "I prefer effective, ma'am," Katie had replied. Hayes had smiled at that. "We'll see." The Defiant was assigned to convoy escort duty in the outer systems, protecting merchant ships from the occasional pirate attack. It was boring work, but Katie didn't mind. She used the quiet time to study the old reports from Border Patrol, looking for patterns that others had missed. The patterns were there. Energy signatures that moved with purpose. Ships that vanished without explanation. Cargo vessels found drifting empty, their crews simply gone. The signs had been building for years, but no one wanted to see them. Katie was reviewing shipping manifests in her quarters when the emergency klaxons began wailing. She ran to the bridge, arriving just as Captain Hayes was receiving priority. "Communications from Fleet Command. All ships, this is Admiral Stone." The transmission crackled with interference. "We are under attack. Repeat, the Alliance is under attack. Unknown hostile forces have struck simultaneously across 17 sectors." Katie felt ice form in her stomach. She had known this day would come. The next few hours brought reports that grew worse by the minute. The Proxima system had gone silent. The trade hub at Alpha Centauri was under siege. Core fleet vessels were reporting contact with vessels that moved like ghosts and struck like lightning. "They're describing the same ships we encountered 2 years ago," Katie told Captain Hayes. Privately, Hayes nodded grimly. "The ones in your buried reports?" "Yes, ma'am. The Void Collective, as I've been calling them. Their technology is far beyond anything we've seen before." More reports flooded in. Admiral Zarthek's First Fleet had engaged the enemy at the Arcturus, nebula with overwhelming firepower and numerical superiority. It should have been a decisive victory for the Alliance. Instead, it was a massacre. The enemy ships phased in and out of normal space like nightmares made real. They appeared inside Alliance formations, striking at close range before vanishing. Again. Their weapons didn't just destroy ships, they drained them, leaving empty hulks drifting in space. Zarthek's flagship barely escaped with a handful of survivors. The proud prince who had mocked Katie at the academy was now a broken officer. His confidence shattered along with his fleet. "They don't fight like anything we've ever faced," his desperate transmission reported. "Our formations mean nothing to them. Our tactics are useless. They appear and disappear at will, striking where we least expect them." Katie knew exactly what he meant. She had faced these creatures before, and only her refusal to follow standard procedures had saved the horizon. Captain Hayes assembled her senior staff. The faces around the table were grim as they discussed their orders. "Fleet. Command wants us to escort civilian evacuees from the Kepler system," Hayes announced. "Standard convoy protection protocols." Katie raised her hand. "Captain, with respect, standard protocols won't work against these enemies." The other officers shifted uncomfortably. Katie's reputation for unconventional thinking had followed her. "To the Defiant." "Explain," Hayes said simply. Katie stood and activated the tactical display. "The Void Collective doesn't follow our rules of engagement. They use hit-and-run tactics, phase-shifting technology, and energy-draining weapons. Traditional convoy formation will make us sitting targets." "What do you suggest?" Hayes asked. Katie began sketching ship movements on the display. "We spread out, use the asteroid fields as cover, make ourselves unpredictable, force them to fight, on our terms instead of theirs." Commander Rex, the ship's executive officer, shook his head. "That's not how convoy protection works. We maintain formation, protect the civilians, and rely on our superior firepower." "Our superior firepower didn't help Admiral Zarthek," Katie pointed out. "That's enough," Rex snapped. "We follow established procedures, not the wild theories of a disgraced academy graduate." Captain Hayes held up her hand for silence. "Lieutenant Commander Martinez, you've faced these enemies before. What happened during that encounter?" Katie described the ambush at the Vega asteroid field. how the enemy had used deception and superior technology to trap them, how standard tactics had failed completely. But you survived, Hayes noted. Yes, ma'am. By abandoning everything the Academy taught us about proper engagement protocols. The room was quiet. Finally, Hayes spoke. We'll modify our approach. Maintain convoy protection as our primary mission, but we'll adapt our tactics based on Lieutenant Commander Martinez's recommendations. Commander Rex looked like he wanted to object, but Hayes's tone brooked no argument. 3 days later, they encountered the enemy. The civilian convoy was moving through the Tau Ceti system when long-range sensors detected the telltale energy signatures Katie had learned to recognize. She was at the tactical station, watching the displays with growing tension. Contact bearing 27 Mark V, she reported. Multiple vessels, unknown configuration. All ships, this is Defiant, Captain Hayes transmitted to the convoy. Implement emergency scatter protocol. The merchant vessels broke formation, moving in seemingly random directions toward the nearest cover. To any observer, it looked like panic. But Katie had spent hours briefing the civilian captains on her tactics. The Void Collective ships materialized right where the convoy would have been if they had maintained standard formation. Their weapons fired into empty space, expecting to find clustered targets. Instead, they found the Defiant waiting for them. Katie had positioned the cruiser behind a large asteroid, using its bulk to mask their energy signature. As the enemy ships appeared, confused by the missing convoy, the Defiant struck from ambush. Fire all weapons, Hayes ordered. The cruiser's guns blazed, catching 2 Void ships before they could phase shift to safety. But the others adapted quickly, beginning their deadly dance of appearing and disappearing. They're trying to surround us, Katie called out. Recommend we move to intercept Vector 4-1. It seemed like madness, flying directly into the enemy formation instead of maintaining defensive position. But Katie had studied their patterns. The Void ships expected their opponents to retreat, to seek safety in distance and defensive positions. The Defiant charged forward, weapons blazing. The enemy, caught off guard by the aggressive move, scattered to avoid collision. In that moment of confusion, Katie targeted their lead ship. Direct hit, she reported as dark energy bled from the enemy vessel. Target disabled. The remaining Void ships withdrew, unwilling to continue a fight that wasn't going according to their expectations. Captain Hayes looked at Katie with new respect. Casualty report? Minor damage to forward shields. All civilian vessels accounted for and proceeding to safe harbor. Outstanding work, Lieutenant Commander. But Katie knew this was just the beginning. The enemy would adapt, would learn from this encounter just as they had learned from Admiral Zarthek's defeat. The next battle would be harder. News of the Defiant's success spread quickly through Fleet Command. It was the first significant victory against the Void Collective, proof that they could be beaten. But it also revealed how inadequate traditional alliance tactics were against this new enemy. Admiral Stone herself contacted Captain Hayes with new orders. You're being reassigned to Special Operations, Stone announced. Lieutenant Commander, Martinez will be promoted to Commander and given authority to develop new tactical doctrines. Katie felt a mixture of pride and terror. She had spent years being dismissed as a troublemaker, and now they wanted her to save the galaxy. Ma'am, she said to Hayes privately, I'm not sure I'm ready for this responsibility. Hayes smiled. Ready or not? You're the only one who's figured out how to beat them. The question is whether the rest of the fleet will listen to you. Katie looked out at the stars, knowing that somewhere in that darkness, the Void Collective was planning their next move. The real war was just beginning, and everything would depend on convincing people who had spent years mocking her that sometimes the only way to win was to throw out the rulebook entirely. The Deathworlder girl was about to become the Alliance's greatest hope. She just hoped she was strong enough to bear that burden. Commander Katie Martinez stood in the briefing room of Alliance Command, surrounded by the galaxy's most senior military officers. Maps showing the Void Collective's advance covered every wall. Red zones marked lost systems, and the red was spreading, faster each day. Admiral Rebecca Stone, a stern woman with gray hair and calculating eyes, gestured to the tactical displays. Commander Martinez, your victory at Tau Ceti was the first good news we've had in months. We need you to turn that success into a strategy we can use fleet-wide. Katie looked around the room at faces that ranged from curious to openly hostile. Many of these officers had been her instructor's contemporaries at the academy. They remembered her as the troublesome Deathworlder who questioned established doctrine. The Void Collective doesn't fight like us, Katie began. They use our own tactics against us. Every time we form traditional battle lines, they appear behind us. Every time we group our ships for mutual support, they strike from multiple directions at once. General Haxton, an elderly Zephyrian with battle scars across his crystal surface, interrupted. So you suggest we abandon thousands of years of proven military science? I suggest we adapt or die, Katie replied calmly. The current approach isn't working. Prince Zarthek, who had barely survived the disaster at Arcturus, stood from his seat. His once proud bearing was now hunched with defeat. The human speaks truth. My fleet followed every regulation, every established procedure. The enemy destroyed us anyway. The room buzzed with uncomfortable murmurs. Zarthek's admission carried weight because of his previous reputation as a brilliant tactical mind. Admiral Stone raised her hand for silence. Commander Martinez, what do you propose? Katie activated the holographic display in the room's center. I call it Chaos Doctrine. Instead of rigid formations, we use flexible units that can adapt quickly. Instead of predictable attack patterns, we embrace controlled randomness. Instead of fighting by their rules, we force them to fight by ours. Chaos is not strategy, General Haxton protested. It's the absence of strategy. No, sir, Katie replied. Chaos Doctrine is about creating so many variables that the enemy can't predict our next move. It's about turning our apparent weakness into strength. She began demonstrating with the holographic ships. Instead of neat formations, she showed scattered groups that moved like hunting packs. Instead of frontal assaults, she displayed hit-and-run attacks that used civilian infrastructure and natural obstacles as weapons. This looks like piracy, not proper warfare, another officer commented. Katie nodded. Exactly, the Void Collective expects us to fight like civilized beings. They've adapted their tactics to counter our traditional approaches, but they haven't adapted to fighting dirty. Admiral Stone studied the display carefully. Show me how this works in practice. Katie began running simulations. Her ships moved like they were alive, reacting to threats and opportunities without waiting for central command. They used asteroids as shields, space stations as launch platforms, and even civilian vessels as decoys and weapons. It was ugly. It violated every principle of honorable warfare that the Academy taught. It also worked. Impressive, Admiral Stone said finally. But can other commanders implement these tactics? Katie had been thinking about that problem for weeks. I need to train a special unit. Officers who can think flexibly and adapt quickly. Unfortunately, most of our best commanders are too set in their ways. You mean you need misfits and outcasts? Stone observed. Yes, ma'am. People the establishment has rejected because they think differently. Stone was quiet for a moment. Very well, you'll have carte blanche to recruit whoever you need. But, Commander, you'll face resistance from within our own ranks. Many officers would rather lose honorably than win with what they'll call savage tactics. Katie had already experienced that resistance. Over the following weeks, she assembled her team from the rejects and troublemakers of the Alliance military. Ben Walker, her old friend from the Academy, joined as her chief engineer. Lieutenant Sarah Kim, a human pilot who had been court-martialed for unauthorized tactical innovations, became her flight leader. Commander Vex, a disgraced Nexarian who had been demoted for questioning orders, took charge of intelligence analysis. They worked in secret facilities, developing weapons and tactics that would horrify traditional military minds. Ben's jury-rigged systems turned civilian cargo haulers into guided missiles. Sarah's pilots learned to fly like they were being chased by predators, never staying in one place long enough to become easy targets. The real test came when the Void Collective attacked the mining colony at Epsilon Eridani. Katie's special unit was deployed for the first time as a coordinated force. Instead of meeting the enemy in open space, Katie positioned her ships throughout the asteroid mining field. When the void vessels appeared, expecting to find another traditional fleet formation, they instead found themselves in a maze of rock, metal, and hidden weapons. The battle looked like chaos to outside observers. Ships darted between asteroids, using mining equipment as weapons and ore containers as improvised bombs. Katie's forces struck from every direction, never where the enemy expected, always moving, always adapting. The Void Collective tried to use their phase-shifting technology, but the dense asteroid field limited their options. Every time they materialized, they found weapons aimed at them from unexpected angles. Direct hit on Target 3, Sarah reported over the comm, used a mining laser to cut right through their hull. Enemy formation breaking up, Vex announced. They're trying to withdraw. Katie watched the tactical display with satisfaction. Let them go. We've proved our point. The victory at Epsilon Eridani was even more decisive than Tau Ceti, but the reaction from Alliance Command was mixed. While Admiral Stone praised the results, many other officers were appalled by the methods. This is not warfare, General Haxton complained in an official protest. This is barbarism disguised as strategy. Prince Zarthek, who had observed the battle, disagreed. This is survival. The enemy doesn't care about our concepts of honor. The debate raged throughout Fleet Command. Some officers began requesting transfers to avoid serving under Katie's command. Others, mostly younger officers who had seen many defeats, quietly requested assignment to her units. The crisis deepened when intelligence reported that the Void Collective was massing forces for a major assault. The target was Earth itself, humanity's homeworld. The attack served multiple purposes, eliminating the source of the new tactics while sending a message to the galaxy about challenging their invasion. Katie felt the weight of responsibility crushing down on her. The planet where she had been born, where her family still lived, was about to become a battlefield, and she was the only person who might be able to save it. The defense of Earth will require everything we've learned, she told her assembled team. But it will also require more. We'll need to use Earth itself as a weapon. Ben looked up from his engineering reports. What do you mean? Katie called up a holographic display of Earth's orbital space. Everyone calls our world a death world because everything on it tries to kill you. Well, everything around it is just as dangerous if you know how to use it. She began outlining her plan. It was insane, desperate, and completely unlike anything in military history. It would turn Earth's entire orbital infrastructure into a weapon system, using space junk, abandoned satellites, and even the planet's magnetic field against the invaders. This could work, Sarah said slowly. But we'll need perfect coordination, and we'll need the civilian population to cooperate, Vex added. This plan requires using commercial vessels and civilian infrastructure. Katie nodded. I know. We're asking people to abandon everything they've been taught about the separation between military and civilian operations. The Void Collective won't respect that separation anyway, Ben pointed out. To them, we're all targets. As they prepared for the defense of Earth, Katie received word that Prince Zarthek had requested assignment to her command. The former Academy Prince wanted to learn her methods to understand how she had succeeded where traditional approaches had failed. Are you sure about this? Admiral Stone asked during their final briefing. Your plan is brilliant, but it's also completely unprecedented. If it fails, we lose everything. Katie looked out at the stars, knowing that somewhere in that darkness the greatest enemy fleet in galactic history was heading toward her home. Admiral, we've been losing everything anyway. At least this way we're fighting on our own terms. The battle for Earth was about to begin, and with it the final test of whether a Deathworlder's way of thinking could save not just humanity, but the entire galaxy. The Void Collective fleet emerged from hyperspace like a dark cloud across Earth's solar system. Their ships numbered in the thousands, more than had ever been seen in one place. Each vessel pulsed with the strange energy that allowed them to phase between dimensions, making them seem like living shadows against the stars. Katie stood on the bridge of her flagship, the retrofitted cruiser UGS Defiant, watching the enemy approach. Around Earth, Her defensive network waited in apparent chaos. Ships hid behind space stations and asteroid fields, even among the orbital debris that humans had been accumulating for centuries. "Enemy fleet entering engagement range," reported Lieutenant Sarah Kim from her fighter squadron. "They're forming up just like the tactical manuals predict." Katie smiled grimly. The Void Collective had studied Alliance military doctrine and adapted their strategies to counter traditional formations, but they had never faced anything like what she was about to unleash. "All units, this is Commander Martinez," she broadcast on all frequencies. "Remember, we're not fighting their war anymore. We're fighting ours. Execute Deathworld protocol." What happened next would have horrified every military instructor at the academy. Instead of forming battle lines, Katie's forces scattered like frightened animals. Ships that should have stood and fought instead fled toward Earth, drawing the enemy deeper into the system. The Void Fleet commander, confident in their overwhelming superiority, ordered pursuit. Their ships phased in and out of normal space, hunting what appeared to be a broken and retreating force. They had no idea they were flying into the deadliest trap in human history. Phase 1 complete, Ben Walker reported from his engineering station. All civilian vessels in position. Katie had done something no military commander in galactic history had ever attempted. She had turned Earth's entire civilian infrastructure into a weapon. Cargo haulers carried improvised explosives. Passenger liners had been fitted with mining lasers. Even garbage scows had been modified to become guided missiles. "Enemy ships entering the debris field," Vex announced from his intelligence post. "They're maintaining pursuit formation." The space around Earth was filled with centuries of human refuse. Old satellites, spent rocket stages, fragments from construction projects, and the accumulated junk of a spacefaring civilization. Most species kept their orbital space clean and organized. Humans had turned theirs into a weapon. "Activate the debris net," Katie ordered. Hidden throughout the junk field, small devices that Ben had designed began broadcasting powerful electromagnetic pulses. The signals disrupted the Void ship's phase-shifting ability, forcing them into normal space where they could be targeted. Direct hits on multiple targets, Sarah reported as her fighters emerged from behind disabled satellites, firing at point-blank range. The enemy can't phase shift in this interference field, but the Void Collective adapted quickly. Their larger ships began using brute force to clear paths through the debris, destroying everything in their way. They were still more advanced, still more powerful than anything humanity possessed. Katie had planned for that too. "Phase 2, she commanded. "All civilian vessels, engage." The sight that followed would have been impossible to believe without seeing it. Passenger ships designed to carry tourists between worlds suddenly revealed hidden weapons and dove at enemy vessels like diving birds of prey. Cargo haulers, their holds filled with industrial explosives, rammed into Void ships before detonating. It wasn't honorable. It wasn't civilized. It was pure, desperate survival. Prince Zarthak, commanding a squadron of Alliance vessels that had adopted Katie's tactics, watched in amazement as a garbage scow destroyed a Void dreadnought by ramming its reactor core into the enemy's hull. "This is madness," he transmitted to Katie. Magnificent madness. Katie barely heard him. She was coordinating hundreds of vessels, civilian and military, in a battle that had no precedent in galactic history. Every ship was a weapon. Every piece of debris was a potential missile. Even Earth's magnetic field had been weaponized, using the planet's natural defenses to disrupt enemy systems. The Void Fleet, despite their technological superiority, found themselves fighting an enemy that refused to follow any recognizable pattern. Every time they adapted to one threat, 3 more appeared from directions they hadn't expected. "Enemy command ship identified," Vex reported. "Large vessel, central position in their formation, heavy shielding." Katie studied the tactical display. The Void command ship was the key to their entire fleet. Destroy it and the rest would lose coordination. But it was protected by layers of smaller vessels and its own formidable defenses. A direct assault would be suicide. A traditional siege would take too long. Earth couldn't survive a prolonged battle. Katie made a decision that would have gotten her expelled from the academy in disgrace. "Ben, how long to overload our reactor core?" Ben's four eyes went wide. Katie, you can't be serious. How long? Maybe 10 minutes if we push everything past safety limits. But the ship will be destroyed. Katie looked around the bridge at her crew. These people had followed her through battles that no one else could win. They had trusted her with their lives repeatedly. All hands, this is the captain, she announced over the ship's internal comm. Prepare for emergency evacuation. We're going to ram the enemy command ship. The bridge was silent for a moment. Then Sarah's voice came over the comm from her fighter. Negative. Commander, you're not doing this alone. One by one, other voices joined her. Ben from engineering, Vex from intelligence, even Prince Zarthek from his distant squadron. We started this together, Zarthek transmitted. We finish it together. Katie felt tears in her eyes. All ships form up on the Defiant. We're going to show these invaders what happens when you threaten a death world. The final assault was unlike anything in military history. Instead of one ship ramming the enemy, dozens of vessels formed up in a wedge formation with the Defiant at the point. They accelerated toward the Void command ship at maximum speed, using everything from destroyed satellites to civilian escape pods as improvised shields. The enemy threw everything they had at the approaching formation. Ships exploded around Katie as they pressed forward. But for every vessel they lost, 2 more took its place. 30 seconds to impact, Ben reported, his hands dancing over the engineering controls. Reactor overload at critical levels. All ships emergency teleport now, Katie ordered. Throughout the formation, crews activated emergency transport systems, beaming to nearby rescue vessels. But Katie remained on the bridge of the Defiant, guiding the ship through its final moments. Katie, get out of there. Sarah's voice crackled over the comm. Someone has to guide her in, Katie replied calmly. Make sure she hits the target. The Defiant struck the Void command ship's phase-shifting generator at exactly the moment Ben's overloaded reactor reached critical mass. The explosion created a feedback loop that cascaded through the entire enemy fleet, disrupting their phase technology and leaving them vulnerable in normal space. Katie felt the transport beam take her. At the last possible second, Ben having activated the emergency system without her permission, she materialized on Sarah's fighter just in time to watch the Void fleet tear itself apart as their own exotic technology turned against them. The battle was over. Earth was saved. The Void Collective, their command structure destroyed and their technological advantage neutralized, retreated into hyperspace and were never seen again. In the months that followed, Katie found herself promoted to admiral and tasked with establishing a new naval academy on Earth. Officers from across the galaxy came to study her methods, to learn what they called Deathworlder tactics. Prince Zarthek was among her first students, his pride finally humbled enough to accept that survival mattered more than honor. You were right at the academy, he told her during one of their training sessions. War is about winning, not about following rules. Katie watched her new students practice the chaotic, adaptive tactics that had saved the galaxy. They came from every species, every world, united by the understanding that sometimes the only way to protect civilization was to abandon civilized thinking. No, she corrected Zarthek gently. War is about protecting what you love. Everything else is just details. The galaxy was safe now, protected by those who understood that true strength came not from superior technology or noble traditions, but from the willingness to adapt, to survive, and to fight with everything you had when everything you loved was at stake. The Deathworlder girl who had been mocked for her savage thinking had become the teacher of a new generation, passing on the hard-won knowledge that sometimes the greatest victories came from embracing the chaos that lived in every sentient being's heart.